Just before you start again, Ms. Richards, can I mention something which has come to light? Just at the start of the break, someone came forward to talk about tweeting. They had not, I think, realized that tweeting what is said in this room and has not yet been put on YouTube or the delayed feed, it would be a breach of the order I made this morning. I'm told that the person who came forward was very upset and very apologetic for what they had done. And given that we've spoken a bit about courage and openness and honesty this morning, I'd just like to say that I acknowledge their guts in coming forward to admit that they had broken my order. They may not be the only person, I hope they are, but for that reason, I do not propose to name them openly. I am told to expect a letter of apology this evening, and that seems to me to be sufficient action in that particular case. And as I say, I admire them for having the guts to admit what they had done. But it sends a message to all of us, I think, that we just have to be careful. The words mean what they say. The purpose of them is to protect potentially damaging information, damaging, that is, to confidentiality, which we must maintain. You are privileged, we are all privileged in this hearing room, and for that matter, those who are on the direct stream outside and have signed undertakings of confidentiality. We are all responsible for that, and I'm sure most of us have done just that, but it's a reminder, I think. That's all I want to say about it, and Ms. Richards, we can continue.
Lord Owen, we'd been looking at the minutes of a meeting of the expert group on the treatment of haemophilia in March 1973. And there's just one passage I want to draw your attention to and then ask you a question about. Henry, could we have that up again, please? Thank you. It's the top 3 paragraphs. And you'll see in the context of in the course of the meeting, this is said. Top of the page, it's essential the production and distribution of the therapeutic agents concerned should be considered as a UK exercise. And then we can skip to the 3rd paragraph. Close cooperation between England, including Wales and Northern Ireland, and Scotland will be required in order to coordinate and optimise blood collection and transport, the fractionation processes, distribution of the therapeutic agents and utilisation of other blood fraction byproducts. Wanted to ask you, first of all, Lord Owen, what the extent of your responsibilities were and the Secretary of State's responsibilities were in relation to Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, and I suspect each fall to be treated differently at that time.
Well, health was not a devolved power in the sense that we didn't have a Scottish executive like we have now, but there was a Secretary of State for Scotland with considerable powers for Scotland through his office. I think at the time Willie Ross was the Secretary of State for Scotland. So I think the blood transfusion service would probably have come under him in Scotland, but they were meant to be collegiate. And I think I did mention when I was answering the question about the American company that was asking for a request, that I actually did ask, but I think I could only ask that they would consult with Scotland at their next meeting about this very issue of coordination. And they did do it, and they also enclosed the minutes of this, and that was, I think, in 1976. So it did concern me. Of course, the really critical article of the blood transfusion services UK-wide from the Scottish director, Cash. That was in 1980, and I think, in the British Journal, the BMJ. So the answer is, I think, the regional transfusion centres also prided themselves that they were independent decision makers. I think the department thought they were a little bit too independent, and that was one of the reasons why we put this capital injection of $500,000 into the self-sufficiency program, so that we had the department had a stake. And then people like Bob Reed would talk to regional medical officers of health, who are usually represented on the board of the transfusion people, to try and get some inner coherence for the UK as a whole.
So in relation to Scotland, it would be the Scottish Home and Health Department that would have primary responsibility, is that right, for matters of policy? But you would expect close liaison between the department of which you were a member.
Yes,
and the Scottish
ultimately,
department.
if it got very bad, I think I mentioned that we asked Brian Abel-Smith to look at the whole question. He was really principally Barbara Castle's advisor, but he was respected, and he did call together to try and get greater coordination. But if we had felt really something needed to be done, which we might well have done after I left in 70, this was an issue for 76, really, from what I remember. But you're right, it was pointed out in 73 as being important. The Secretary of State, in Barbara Castle's case, she would raise it directly with Willie Ross rather than probably I would write to him. It would go up at cabinet ministers.
And then what about the position in relation to Wales? Did the same apply in terms of the Welsh office? What was the position then?
Well, the Welsh office started to get more powers as the whole devolution issue started, but I'm afraid I can't quite remember. In 74, it was in its infancy. It had started. There'd been a Secretary of State for Wales for quite a long time. But by and large, anyhow, the Welsh and the English health service works very closely, because there is a strange border, and people go from England to Welsh hospitals and from Wales into English hospitals, because it makes sense in terms of the catchment area, and they ignore the boundary line, and there's cross-financing arrangements. And broadly speaking, I mean, I'm 100% Welsh. I have no English blood in me at all. By and large, that's my prejudice. So by and large, I think Wales and England have no difficulty, and never have, really. There's been good relationship between them. The frostiness has come a little bit in Scotland, and maybe always there, I don't know. I mean, Scotland has, Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and Royal College of Physicians, first-class medicine. There's a lot that is very good about the Scottish healthcare, as I've watched over the years, and very high quality. I'm not making disparaging comments. Actually, in this case, they had the capacity to expand, and it was only sensible to utilize that capacity as a cost-effective way of expanding.
And then what, if anything, can you recall about the position in terms of Northern Ireland? Who had, as it were, policy responsibility in terms of blood safety, blood products and the like?
Well, again, as devolution took place, more and more power went to the First Minister and this Stormont Parliament. But I mean, Stormont had existed for quite a while. But again, there was direct rule for quite a long time. So in which case, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland under direct rule. And I think direct rule. Well, I was in the Ministry of Defence as a junior minister for the Navy when we went in and took control of Northern Ireland, and that was 1968.
Do you recall, again, very conscious that these are events a long time ago, do you recall whether there were any particular discussions or involvement of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland or the Chief Medical Officers in relation to Wales or Northern Ireland?
I think the Chief Medical Officers work very well. You're seeing this in COVID now. I think that the Chief Medical Officers left to themselves would have no problem agreeing. So I think sometimes it's the politicians that are more the problem. But I don't want to exaggerate. I was beginning to sense there was a problem, but I didn't think that blood transfusion services was not a big problem for me in 74 to 76. I began to realize it was more of a problem later, and then there was this, very serious criticism of the blood transfusion services in the UK, which may not have been, it's just one man's view, but it was, I think a lot of people felt it needed to be said, that article in the BMJ, but that was 1980.
Can I then come on to your time in office directly and a handful of the documents relating to that? I want to pick it up, if I may, with a document in June 1974. Henry, it's DHSC 01405_135. So you'll see, Lord Owen, this is a meeting on the 26th of June 1974, so you're currently Parliamentary Under Secretary of State. And if we go down, please, Henry, to paragraph 2.2, the issue here is about the central contracting arrangements that have been put in place in relation to the US imports. And then 2.2 says this: when the central contracting was first discussed in March 1973, it was hoped that UK needs for AHG would be supplied by the BTS by mid-1975. Dr. Maycock said this would not now be possible, nor could he give a revised date at this stage because of financial stringency. Further contracts would therefore be necessary for at least another year and possibly more. Had you been aware that the aspiration as at 1973 had been there would be self-sufficiency by 1975?
Can you go to the date again?
Yes, 26th of June 1974.
74. June 74.
So this is before your announcement.
I think the answer probably is yes, in that we knew that I was aching to make a statement that we would be self-sufficient, and I couldn't do it. This had to be sorted out. And they took it on, the staff in the department, and they were these two. There was Elstree was the trouble, Oxford was the trouble on AHG concentrate, and one other of the regional ones had financial problems, I seem to remember. So we had to go back to them to get them all signed up. That's what we used to talk about. It's signing up the regional health people to self-sufficiency. And then I wanted to announce it to Parliament as soon as I could, and that was only in, I think, January 75, when in a written question. And that was a sort of, I tagged it on, really, to a written question which was about whether or not we had enough supplies. The answer was, of course, we didn't.
Let's look at the announcement that you made in January 1975, Lord Owen. Henry, I think this is right. DHSC 0046887. It's the bottom right-hand. Well, we can see from the top, it's a written answer, as you recall, Lord Owen, 22nd of January 1975. If we can go to the bottom of the page, please, Henry.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth looking at the whole of your answer here. The amount of factor VIII materials, including cryoprecipitate, produced within the National Health Service is not sufficient. And in particular, there is an immediate need to provide more human AHG concentrate, which is now the preferred treatment for haemophilic patients. There is also an increasing demand for certain other blood fractions. At present, part of the demand for AHG concentrate is being met by imported material, but this is very expensive. And for reasons which I well understand, health authorities feel they cannot afford to buy as much as they would wish to, given the various claims on their resources. And then you say this: I believe it is vitally important that the NHS should become self-sufficient as soon as practicable in the production of factor VIII, including AHG concentrate. This will stop us being dependent on imports and make the best-known treatment more readily available to people suffering from haemophilia. I have therefore authorised the allocation of special finance to boost our own production with the objective of becoming self-sufficient over the next few years. And then if we can just look at an answer you gave the following month, and then I want to ask you some questions about it. So, Henry, it's DHSC 0046888. I don't know whether we can have them side by side, but don't worry if we can't. So this is an oral answer that you gave on the 25th of February 1975. And we can pick it up, second left-hand column. I have authorised the allocation of special finance of up to £500,000, about half of which would be recurring, to increase the existing production of factor VIII, especially in the form of anti-haemophilic.
I'm not sure we're on the right page.
Yes, it is the right page, sir.
The right part there, but thank you.
There, thank
Got
you.
it.
Yes. Especially in the form of AHG within the National Health Service. The first effects of this will, I hope, be felt by the end of the year. And then if we could go down the page, please. We can see in your next answer you refer to the desirability of the treatment, but it being one of the many costly treatments competing on priorities. And then if we could go to the next column, please, Henry. So same page. Thank you. And then we see your answer here. That's the regional health authorities, are aware of it, are concerned, and have had ample demonstration of it by the fact that we are prepared to divert scarce resources to make the NHS self-sufficient. But I can see that it will take 2 or 3 years before we are at full production, and then you refer to perhaps individual cases being weighed very carefully. So in those two announcements, Lord Owen, made by you to Parliament, you've set out a goal of self-sufficiency. Can I just ask you, was that in your mind a mere aspiration or hope, or was it now a firm government policy that the UK would become self-sufficient?
I think it's a pledge. I think when you are diverting money from central government to the regions, then I think you have to announce that to Parliament. And this is more important announcement. This was an add-on in the first one to a written question. It says there's going to be money, but it actually tells them how much money is being put. And all through the 80s and everything like that, I've always said you couldn't move away from self-sufficiency without telling Parliament. I mean, you can change policy, but the advantage of doing this is that you're making a pledge, and you couldn't resolve from that without going back to Parliament. And I don't think we ever went back to Parliament. From the time I left, I've never been able to find any statement which said we were no longer doing self-sufficiency. It was always claimed that we were, in a variety of complicated ways. But Parliament was never told that it was not doing it. And therefore, to the argument, well, you didn't provide the resources. I couldn't provide the resources. I explained it was quite difficult to make anything more than 1 year as a forward commitment. But if you make a commitment to a policy, you are binding your successors to find the resources within reason. And I think that that's the importance of Parliament. The other thing we should remember is that there were members of Parliament who were becoming very concerned about this issue. And the outstanding one was Alf Morris. He was in the department all this time looking after disability. And he was seeing, I think he was the first minister for disablement. And he was, firstly, we discussed it every week, when these things came up collectively, ministerial. But he was seeing the consequences in the disabled children who were coming up with haemophilia. And he never, ever shifted from it. He's an outstanding demonstration of a member of Parliament who gets the bit between his teeth and consistently pushes and pushes and pushes. All through the 80s and 90s, he was behind the Archer inquiry, and his contribution, I'd like to say publicly, was a magnificent one. And quite frankly, he used to come and put pressure on me to do more.
Can I suggest to you there are three particularly significant things about the two announcements that we've just looked at in Parliament. The first is the one you've alluded to. This was a statement being made, in your terms, a pledge to Parliament.
Well, it was talking about better treatment, which, if you like, is a euphemism for UK treatment, UK resources.
And secondly, we see you're committing a specific sum of money, and you say about half of which would be recurring. So it's an ongoing commitment financially in that sense. And thirdly, you've put a timescale. It's not an absolute or precise timescale, but it's an expectation that it will take 2 to 3 years.
Yes, and when that was pushed further along the track and went over 3 years, I objected when I discovered this, and we had a meeting and we called to account, and they went away and put it back on track. And I told them that if it happens again, I don't want to be told about it. I want to be told about it as soon as it happens so we can put remedial action into it. And so these things slip because, understandably, everybody's got a higher priority, what they think a higher priority is. And it's not, chronic illness, which a lot of these people would become under the classification chronic disability, we've never been very good at treating. And that's why the Minister for Disablement came, and Harold Wilson attached a lot of importance to that post. And so did many other ministers. John Major actually, I think, held that job as his first job in government. And he then took that commitment into being Prime Minister. So the disabled provision has become a lot better than it was. It's still not enough. And it's still not enough in terms of income. And, there is, Mr. Chairman, you alluded to it in your letter to Penny Mordaunt, that the government is still not, while this inquiry is going on, is still in a situation where payments are more generous to people in Scotland than they are in Wales and England, and that we are still, in my view, not fulfilling our financial obligation, particularly given that we were not self-sufficient in time.
Now, these parliamentary statements don't, in express terms, talk about the dangers of imported concentrates or the risk of viral transmission, which I think is one of the points made by the Ombudsman years later. We'll come back to the Ombudsman in due course. But is there any particular reason you can recall why that wasn't spelt out in black and white in these statements?
Well, on the first one, as I say, you were riding the back of George Cunningham's written question, which is what deficiencies exist in the supply of factor 8 cryoprecipitate for the treatment of haemophilia. And if you look at this, the first paragraph answers that question. The second paragraph says we're doing something about self-sufficiency. And the other replies, well, sometimes you put but we were still carrying on buying this blood, and we were putting it into people's veins, and we were utilizing it, and we knew we were going to have to go on doing that for at least 2 to 3 years. that until self-sufficiency took place, we weren't going to be able to stop it being used. And, you know, this went on with the whole problem when AIDS hit us. And in '83, again, the question was put, should you be allowing this to be used? And the Committee on Safety of Drugs said, weighing all these factors, yes. So you were on this delicate question. I mean, I don't think as I said, I didn't want secrecy, but I didn't want to create fear in people who were having it. That's not my job. And I'm not trying to exclaim it. That had to be what doctors said to patients. I don't want to go back over what I've said in full already. It is very, very difficult to determine how much you should say to people. And we get this wrong, and we weren't informed consent, really, is the question now. Thank goodness. We are trying to, as a medical profession, to be more open with patients. And of course, it's, you know, you tap in on the thing, haemophilia, and you'll have detailed things. You can look up Rosemary Bridges' article. You read the whole thing. It's a completely different world we're living in now about medical information. You read a newspaper, Daily Mail, has page after page about medicine. And, you know, and World in Action wanted to put it on there. So it's a really difficult balance.
I want to look with you at a couple of documents that precede your announcement, just to see what the plan was and where the figure of 500,000 came from. If we could have, please, on screen, Henry, DHSC 01405_171. And we'll see that this is a minute dated the 15th of October 1974, so it's in the autumn before your January 1975 announcement. And if we pick it up in the third paragraph, we can see it says increased production depends in the first place upon an increase in the amount of plasma made available by the 14 regional transfusion centres for fractionation at the Blood Products Laboratory. Extra production of plasma requires in varying degrees in different regional centres additional facilities in terms of equipment and or staff and or accommodation. A rough estimate of the cost of equipment and staff required is approximately £500,000, most of it recurring. Recent reports from regional transfusion directors indicate that RHAs are not unexpectedly unable to make the necessary funds available. And then if we can just look at the next paragraph, please, Henry. We are intending to discuss the present impasse with regional officers. It's not only a problem of finding the money to provide more facilities for the separation of plasma from whole blood, it will also be necessary to persuade clinicians to accept a great deal more blood in the form of concentrated red cells than they do at present. This will require much time and effort. Now, can I just ask you about that second point, first of all, Lord Owen? Maybe this is not an issue that came to you as Minister, but do you know whether the department or the Chief Medical Officer took any particular steps in relation to that second goal, persuading clinicians to accept more blood in the form of concentrated red cells?
Well, the writing says with regional officers. I assume, since this is fairly detailed, they meant regional medical officers, but it's not absolutely clear. Yeah, I think there was a continuous dialogue about this. And if you look at the minutes of the advisory committee, Rosemary Bridges didn't shirk from telling them, nor did the other doctors. I think there is a time delay. I mean, there was a problem with BPL, that it hadn't had enough investment. And again, we flogged off BPL in 2005, 2015 or something, I've forgotten now, when the Secretary of State Hunt was in charge of the health service. I actually wrote to the Prime Minister then, David Cameron, and said there are certain assets which should not be commercialised, and one of which was Bud Products Laboratory. And that was then sold off to Bain and Company, which is a company that just fattens people up, investments up, and then sells them on. So Bain, after 3 years, sold it on. Britain National Health Service took 25% of this, so they got some return, and then it ended up into another company, which owns it now, and that company is headquartered in China. When will we realize, when will we learn that there are certain assets which you need to control inside your own country? We saw this with COVID. We were trying to get material, and people were bribing planes to bring it to us. Why didn't we have some of this self-sufficiency elsewhere? I mean, what is the point of having an NHS if you don't? But we did build up supplies of protective equipment, but then nobody inspected them. And so then when the time came, a lot of it was defective. I'm not making political points here. I'm just trying to get people to understand that if you are dealing with health, there are different rules apply. Governments protect their own citizens. Doesn't matter if they have got export orders. They'll look after their own citizens. We do the same. So if you are completely dependent on foreign companies, I mean, President Trump makes no secret of this, but actually it's happening in all governments around the world. They're closing down their own assets first, bound to do so, facing a world pandemic. You've got to have self-sufficiency is not just a slogan for haemophilia. It was a slogan for AIDS. It was a slogan for Jakob cell disease, and it will be down the track for another unknown virus that will hit us. As I said, there is a way of dealing with COVID through fractionation.
Can I just ask you to go back to this document, paragraph 3, the rough estimate of £500,000, most of it recurring. Now, that's the sum that was in fact secured and made available. It's described there as a rough estimate. Do you know whether there was ever a more polished assessment, or was it a question of 500,000 is what we can get from the Treasury?
Well, I don't think the Treasury would interfere with it. I've said some tough things about the Treasury. It's very easy to blame the Treasury. I think the Treasury, and indeed the Department, in their original warning note to me, is, am I aware of the fact that other areas will suffer? Yes, is the answer. So if you take $500,000 away from it, you've got $500,000 less to spend on other things. But if you are making a commitment to a policy pledge, like self-sufficiency, as you said, some of it was admittedly recurring. Now, I'm sure that my successor, Roland Moyle, contributed more financial resources. But when he answered questions about what had happened as a result of this 500,000 injection in, I think, 78, so I get my figures wrong. I left in 76, 78, 79. They look back on years 74, 75, 76, when I've been, all show that it had an effect. There was increased blood, there was increased concentrate, increased precipitate. So it was working. I don't deny that because demand grew, you had to find more money. But that does not, in my view, call in question the policy of self-sufficiency unless you go back and say we can't afford it.
But just
if I may, the word I think that Council was focusing on was the word recurring.
Yeah,
The £500,000 you have described as a capital sum.
yes.
If it's recurring, it becomes essentially a repeated or revenue expense, does it?
Yes, it goes on.
So the policy lived on the hope that the regions would find out of their budgets £500,000 or thereabouts, most of £500,000 a year, in order to keep the policy going.
It depends on them chipping in, yes, extra amounts, or giving an increased grant to the blood transfusion service. But this is paid for. In those days, there were regional health authorities, and they then were the allocator to the transfusion services, so the debate would take place. We had, I think, more control over the regional health authority, politically, than we would have over the individual transfusion service. So it was more persuasion there. But if we had come to a conclusion that not enough was going, you could have called in the chairman of the regional health authorities and asked them to increase and they would always do that.
Thank you.
But the word I was first focusing on was rough estimate, an approximation, £500,000. I was simply wondering whether there, to your knowledge, was there any more precise analysis or assessment undertaken? Because this is the figure that, in fact, was the figure that you announced in Parliament 4 months later.
I think it probably were those figures. I mean, a rough estimate of the cost of equipment and staff required is approximately 500,000, most of it recurring. Do we state anywhere how much it was recurring?
Yes.
Half of it, 250,000 was,
Yes.
from my memory,
That's
was
absolutely
recurring.
right. That was your ministerial statement on the 25th of February.
Yeah.
So this had identified a rough estimate that the need was for most of that to recur. What you were actually able to offer Parliament in January and February 1975 was a 250,000 capital and 250,000 recurring.
But my answer is it did the trick. I mean, the figures are there in the answers of written questions, both answered by the ongoing Labour government when I was Foreign Secretary, but then also by the incoming government in '82. They didn't deny that it had an effect. The question is, when did it stop? When did it run out? I don't know. But it's certainly run out by the '82, when Mr. Clark makes the statement, we're going to start a policy of self-sufficiency. So I can't answer really. You know, I mean, you do close the door when you leave, and I was off on a fairly taxing job. So I'm afraid I didn't focus. I kicked myself for this, but I didn't really focus on this until '82. And even then, it was '85 when we were really knew that something was seriously wrong.
I want to look at a memo that you've referred to in your evidence already. Henry, it's DHSC 01405_189. And if we have the first paragraph, please. It's dated the 9th of December. And it says, since Dr. Raisin and I discussed with the Minister of State, that's you, last week, the question of supplies of AHD concentrate, we have established within the office that earmarked central finance to the extent of 0.25 million capital and 0.25 revenue can be made available to regional authorities to increase NHS production of this material. And then there's a passage I think you've alluded to, Lord Owen. We have been asked to draw attention to the fact that a decision to make this special allocation of resources to blood products production inevitably means that less money overall will be available for other high priority health authority services, e.g. mentally ill, mentally handicapped, family planning and certain centrally sponsored projects, such as schemes to reduce waiting times. But there is broad agreement that such an allocation would be justifiable. And then if we have the beginning of the next paragraph, please, Henry. And then it says, if the Minister of State confirms his intention to take special measures to increase production of AHD concentrate, he could write in the following terms to several MPs, and then there's a suggested draft letter. The language of this suggests that there may have been a degree of, as I think you suggested in your evidence earlier today, a degree of difference of opinion within the department as to whether this was the right course because of other competing demands. And this memo seems to make clear that it's very much being presented to you as a decision for you as Minister to make. Is that right?
That's what you're there for. And in fact, you're answerable. And you're even answerable when you're 82.
And then if we could just go to the last paragraph of this document, Henry, so it's on the second page. It says there, during our discussion last week, mention was made of a possible arranged PQ. I'm somewhat doubtful about this since the main pressure is for additional money to buy the commercial product now. However, you'll no doubt take the Minister of State's view on this. And then I want to show you your response and then ask you a question. So the response, Henry, is DHSC 0150, sorry, 4 zeros, 5_191. So you say here, this is the 11th of December, it said here, Dr. Owen, as senior minute of the 9th of December, has agreed the submission. He would like one change made to the suggested new standard reply for MPs. In place of the second paragraph you propose, he would like inserted suitably amended versions of the first and second paragraphs of the draft letter to regional administrators, which you also submitted for approval. He's commented that it is time MPs knew the full arguments. He would like to know if there's any objection to this. With reference to paragraph 4 of your minute, Dr. Owen has commented, I agree we should not court publicity. Dealing with the second point first, why was there an issue being raised here about publicity and the possible downsides of publicity?
Well, Mr. Giddon, the first one, from what I remember, was our representative of the Treasury. And I think he was, if you could show it up again, he's warning about the dangers, isn't that the issue? And so I take his warning about not courting publicity. But I say it's time the MPs knew the facts.
And the reference to the MPs knowing the full argument seems to be on the basis you wanted some additional material inserted into what was going to be a standard letter to MPs. Can we look at, we haven't got the precise draft, but we've got the final document that went out. It's CBLA 40239. So this is a letter to the letter to regional administrators, and you've asked in the minute of the 11th of December for some parts of the first and second paragraphs of this to go into your letter to MPs. And we'll see the first paragraph is about the inability of the National Blood Transfusion Service to meet demands for concentrate. And then in the second paragraph, you say, or it says this, at present part of the demand for these blood products is being met by expensive imported material which is now marketed in this country. As demand increases, commercial firms may consider it worth their while to establish panels of paid donors. Such a development would constitute a most serious threat to the voluntary donor system upon which the NBTS is founded. The department therefore regards it as of the greatest importance, quite apart from the question of cost, that the NHS should become self-sufficient as soon as practicable in the production of PPF and other blood products. Now, it would appear that you wanted to have in the communication to MPs a statement of your, as it were, allegiance to the voluntary donor system and the importance of that system. Is that correct?
Yes. For the same reasons the gift relationship and my review of it in the New Statesman.
And then I think we can see, in fact, you're advised against that. If we look at DHSC 302327, _046.
I keep wanting to flick it up.
I know,
because I haven't
sorry.
seen this document, and of course, as I think most people know, I lost access to all my documents.
Yes.
So I haven't seen that.
I think these are part of the materials you've had for the purpose of the inquiry evidence, but
It's
but not
wonderful the way
previously.
you found all these documents, and I congratulate all the people who worked so hard to get them.
And so this is a minute of the 13th of December from Mr. Giddon to Mr. Alexander. We've recast the second and third paragraphs of the new standard draft to MPs, incorporating more of the substance of paragraphs 1 and 2 of the letters to regional administrators, but we would strongly advise against any reference to the point about paid donor panels. There are advocates in this country of the paid donor system, and public debate cannot, we believe, be of any benefit to the NBTS. Furthermore, if the Minister of State were to refer publicly to a threat to the NBTS, it could be taken as a form of challenge to the firms concerned and cause controversy. There's perhaps the additional point that to complete the story, the Minister of State would probably need to hint at legislation to obviate the threat, since there is at present no legal bar to the establishment of paid donor panels. And if we go down to we see the whole of that document, Henry, we can see that you accept that advice as the handwritten note.
Yes, but when I first went into the department, you no doubt found a piece of paper which said that I thought that we should ban commercial donorship of blood, being paid for blood, and also semen, ban the sale of semen. Unfortunately, that was rather naive, and they pointed out to me that would require legislation that impeded on huge number of market principles and other things, and would be very controversial and probably wouldn't get it through. So I had to learn, and I learned my lesson. I couldn't do that, so I had to stop. And that he picked up what I was implying was that was where you could go down that route. I don't think you could go down that route. We wouldn't get it through Parliament.
Yes, and there is a subsequent memo in which you expressly raise the prospect of legislation, and you refer expressly to the Titmus book.
That was, we had a majority of 4 or something like that at this juncture.
Can I then, just moving on in 1975, ask you to look at, again, a couple of documents. The first is a minute of the 17th of March 1975. Henry, it should be at LDOW 5018. And this has been prepared for your benefit, because we can see it says under the heading AHG production, Dr. Owen's minute below. And we can see here, as it were, the detailed plan. And so I just want to spend a little time going through it so that we see what the plan was. Immediately after the decision was taken in December last to invest $500,000 of special finance in AHG concentrate production, provisional targets of plasma production were drawn up for each of the 14 regional transfusion centres. These were then circulated to regional transfusion directors and discussed with them at a special meeting on the 19th of February. The targets have now been revised, and we should be asking regional health authorities next week to indicate the amounts of money required for extra staff, equipment, transport and adaptation of accommodation. And there's a reference to a draft letter and processing the returns as speedily as possible. And then if we see under the heading paragraph 2, the timetable for starting up this programme is likely to depend on the time taken for A, delivery and installation of 3 Sharples centrifuges at Blood Products Laboratory. The quoted delivery period is 6 months. This is evidently the key factor determining the speed with which we can get on. We shall pursue this to see if we can shorten the period. B, adaptation of premises at regional transfusion centres and Blood Products Laboratory. At the latter laboratory, recruitment and training of staff may be a problem. And then there's a reference to a possible risk of time taken to deliver and install certain other items of equipment. And then if we can go to paragraph 3, please, Henry. Whilst the equipment is being delivered and any necessary adaptation of premises made, we are assuming that directors will be successful in persuading clinicians to accept a steadily increasing proportion of blood in the form of concentrated red cells, since this is another yet possible limiting factor. But we're proceeding on the basis of immediate progress once the equipment is working. Meanwhile, we can expect that the rate of production of fresh frozen plasma with existing resources will continue to increase, which will help marginally in the interval before the planned programme gets underway. NHS production of AHG concentrate increased from 5,927 bottles in 1972 to 9,624 bottles in 1974. And then over the page, please, Henry. Much effort will be required of regional transfusion directors, some of whom may not see eye to eye with their clinical colleagues treating haemophiliacs. For example, some haemophilia centre directors envisage home prophylaxis, whereas the present proposals are based upon home treatment of a bleed when it occurs. Other haemophilia centre directors apparently are not fully persuaded of the practicability and value of home treatment. There are therefore several clinical issues involved, but these need not delay the start of increased production. It should be noted, A, that Factor VIII concentrate has not previously been prepared in the NHS on the scale envisaged. This will in itself almost certainly give rise to some problems. And B, the procedure of fractionation is constantly under review with the purpose of improving the yield of Factor VIII from plasma. At present, this is 30 to 40%. 6, we will report again at the end of next month when we should be able to see which centres are able to get off the mark quickly and give some estimate of the rate of increase of AHG production. 7, Dr. Owen also suggested we might consider issuing a letter to authorities asking them to view demands for the supply of the commercial material with sympathy. This could cause irritation if conveyed in an official letter. We suggest instead we might make the point in answer to further PQs, which we're almost certain to get. And if we just got to the top of the first page again, please, Henry. There's some handwriting, which I think, is that yours?
Yes, my handwriting.
Noted, I look forward to the future report promised in 6, and I agree with the advice in 7. So this is, as it were, this is the plan. Mm-hmm. You've announced the pledge in Parliament. This is the work being undertaken, being reported to you, as I understand it, to deliver that pledge. Yes. We can see... So, then, if we pick matters up again in 1975, in the middle of 1975, there was a World Health Organization guideline that you referred to in your statement. Henry, could we just put that up, please? PRSE 303476. And if we can just pick up the date. So it's a World Health Assembly resolution of May 1975, utilisation and supply of human blood and blood products. The 28th World Health Assembly, conscious of the increasing use of blood and blood products, etc., noting the extensive and increasing activities of private firms in trying to establish commercial blood collection and plasmapheresis projects in developing countries, expressing serious concern that such activities may interfere with efforts to establish efficient national blood transfusion services based on voluntary non-remunerated donations, being aware of the higher risk of transmitting diseases when blood products have been obtained from paid rather than voluntary donors, and of the harmful consequences to the health of donors of too frequent blood donations, one of the causes being remuneration. And then member states are urged to promote the development of national blood services based on voluntary, non-remunerated donation of blood. What you've said in your statement about this, Lord Owen, is you were aware of it at the time, and it was part of your continued decision-making to try and ensure that the department kept on top of delivering the pledge.
Yes. There's no inconsistency, if that's what you're after.
No.
Surely what you're saying is you want self-sufficiency. You can't get that for 2 to 3 years. During this time, out there, many, many patients are demanding the new AHG concentrate as being better treatment for cryoprecipitate. And so you're saying to people, you, in the meantime, until we are self-sufficient and have got all these extra things, you are going to have to buy more cryoprecipitate. I was ready to say to them, you've got to do this against all my wishes, because we're trying to meet the demands of patients in the first 2 to 3 years. We are going to need more of it. And they're saying to them, look, they don't want to be told this message, and they won't react against it because they know the consequences of it. It's better for us to do this orally to them and explain the timing and framing of it than you putting it in a letter, which anyhow they don't like being told what to do anyhow, because they know a great deal more about it than they think, and probably rightly so, than the department. So that's the sequence of events. And it's up to me to decide. You either go full frontal and tell them, or you tell them quietly that this is the consequence of this. And you are building up a pool of people, of course, who are going to be using this for their lifetime. And you're hoping that in 3 years' time, you will be able to supply it all from British donors. And then a word of caution, I mean, some British donors won't tell you that they've been yellow and hepatitis, and you will get, and that's again, we're trying to have a lower pooling, less pooling if possible, and again, those people who are mildly affected to really hold out and keep saying to them, you must stay on cryoprecipitate and not go for the more convenient, riskier one. So all this has been handled by these specialists in haemophilia. By now we've got people more or less across the country who are specialists, often pathologists, who are also now seeing patients. Rather pleased, actually, to coming back to seeing patients. And dealing with a new treatment which can actually, from the pathology and the laboratory, if you like, help them. They're very conscious of all this, and they're trying to, and they supported the policy, as you said in the earlier thing. But it was finessing the problem of the 2 to 3 year gap before you could be self-sufficient. But you wanted to get to that point at the earliest possible opportunity because you were doing what you didn't want to do, which was buying in contaminated blood.
We can see if we look at a document from mid-1975, you're asking about the timescale. Henry, it's LDOW 5019. It's a memo minute of the 11th of July 1975, and we can see from the first paragraph, Dr. Owen has commented on PQ 3474, so presumably a written parliamentary question, and proposed answer. Once again, we are a 2 to 3 year timescale. I have asked if we can improve on this. Can I have a note? And then this is, I think, the note that you've asked for, and you're told here. I won't go through the detail of it paragraph by paragraph with you, Lord Owen, but you're told here what the response of the regions has been, and you're told in paragraph 4, the main reason why the programme can't be completed earlier is that in 4 regions extensive alterations have to be made to the transfusion centres before they're in a position to provide more plasma. And then there's reference in the end of that paragraph, we're having difficulties about the date of delivery of 3 Sharple centrifuges for the blood products laboratory. We're pursuing this and hope to resolve the matter soon. And then paragraph 5, we're told that there are 2 regions whose ability to contribute to the programme is at present uncertain. It's hoped that they can be brought in. Paragraph 6, it's difficult to be precise in estimating a date for achieving self-sufficiency, not least because not all are agreed as to what constitutes self-sufficiency. Some haemophilia centre directors envisage prophylactic treatment, whereas the department's programme is based upon home treatment of those patients for whom treatment at home can be recommended. And then in paragraph 7, the note returns to the timescale. We can now say we expect to be self-sufficient within 2 years, or alternatively that within about a year we will be able to meet some 2/3 of present requirements and become self-sufficient in 1977. Again, could we just go to the top of the page, because I think we have your handwriting again there. I'm lucky because I have a typed version of it as well. I think it says, "This is excellent and I recognise that everyone is doing everything possible. I believe we should keep up the pressure. Can I be kept informed on the centrifuges and also the 2 regions? Why are there difficulties and what can be done? I would not easily accept that they should not contribute. I just wanted to ask you about the point that's made in paragraph 6 of this minute, the lack of complete agreement on what constitutes self-sufficiency. Your pledge of self-sufficiency, as I understand it and as this minute seems to make clear, was on the basis of making sufficient concentrates domestically available to enable home treatment for bleeds, but not to meet all prophylactic requirements. Is that right?
Well, I mean, this is, I'm glad you got this. This is what political control is about. The department would have let this slip onto 3 things because they're under so much pressure. So if you want a policy, this is what a politician is there for. You tell them you're not going to let this slip program. They come back with a detailed argument that we can stay within the timescale that we've introduced. And very ingeniously, and they're also watching all these things. But even so, we are saying to them, you can read it there, there's a problem over these centrifuges. I want to know if this problem comes up furthermore. So we're trying all the time to keep the department onto the pledge that we've made. They are not resisting it. And then they say and warn about this, I mentioned it earlier in my evidence, this prophylactic thing. And I think I explained it, but whether I should explain it again, I don't know.
I think it's clear from this.
Prophylaxis is you're actually giving them factor 8 in their bloodstream all the time, so they never bleed. Or you are having available at home, instead of going through to hospital and all the problems with the plastic bags and everything, in which the family can inject pretty quickly and you can stop the bleed. Of course, prophylaxis is the best. I mean, prevention is better than the cure, and it would cost so much more money. And we stuck to that, but eventually we had to accept. Because these doctors make the decision, and they went more and more for prophylaxis, which, if you had a child with it, you'd want prophylaxis. And, I think self-sufficiency. I think this is, I think I should explain that the person sitting next to me has been writing a lot of these letters all through the 80s and 90s and I think this. And she says, and it's worth reminding us, what is the first priority? To build up enough resources to stop having imported blood. That was more important than prophylaxis, in my view. And that's why I didn't change that departmental thing, knowing it would cost anyhow money. I was straining the tolerance of the department's overall commitment to this program. They weren't going to be driven at that stage by the haemophilia experts. But like any department, the doctors, we try to give them what they want for their patients. And we did eventually accept prophylaxis.
If clinicians using prophylaxis was potentially going to impact upon the ability to achieve the pledge of self-sufficiency that the department was working towards, which was home treatment but not prophylaxis, it might have been sensible to take steps to...
What was the first priority, which was to avoid... You wanted to use AHG concentrate. You wanted to treat people at home. And this is another issue, which is to try to avoid children having to go into hospital, which was another policy we were pursuing. And to, wherever possible, keep them at home in their family environment. This time I had children much the same age. And you were wanting all the time to bring home treatment up. So that was a higher priority than the best, safest, which was the cryo. Now you come into a third policy, which is even better than home treatment, and that is to have a level of factor 10 in the blood that they never bleed. But that was going to require huge amounts of extra blood. Much of it would be, on present policies, would be more and more relying on imported blood and infected blood. So you are balancing these priorities, not easy, but again, the department was absolutely solidly with us, the medical advice was solidly with us, we stuck to it at that particular time.
Do you know whether any steps were taken within the department or perhaps by the Chief Medical Officer to try and communicate to the Haemophilia Centre directors who might be using prophylactic treatment that that wasn't what the policy was about?
This is a tricky question. The CMO is the one to do that. I don't know what he was doing at that stage. I'm sure that they were using their advice, and that's one of the reasons they didn't want me to say it. Let's tell them that the only person who can really override clinical freedom is the CMO or his deputy, Bob Reed, who is dealing with this issue. And I think Dr. Yellow-Louise would have taken Reed as he would write a letter on this issue in his name, but it would basically be dependent on Reed's advice. And he'd be weighing all these factors, overriding the freedom of a haemophiliac doctor to do what they think is in the best interest of the patients is very tricky. It is done from time to time, but as far as possible, it's advice to doctors. It's pretty rare for a chief medical officer to issue an edict, but he does have the authority to do so. It's accepted within the profession. He consults the Royal College of Physicians, Royal College of Surgeons, and everything like this. I think it's helpful for people to understand how these decisions are taken. But what's important is that the department is entirely behind the policy, though constantly warning about the cost. Out in the sticks, the haemophiliac doctor is trying to do the best for his patient. And on that scale of priorities, prophylaxis is the best of all. But it's hugely costly because it requires so much blood. And it really was a policy that was better introduced, as it broadly was, as we got less and less dependent on or worried about commercial supplies because of heat treatment for hepatitis. But even then, you see, the self-sufficiency was not, because down the track was AIDS and HIV virus.
So I note the time. Is that a convenient point to stop?
Yes, it is. We'll take a break now for an hour. The usual provisions apply as applied last time. You have allocated seats, I believe. Please use them. And I look forward to seeing you back here. It'll be at 2:05.
Okay.